Welcome to Scale Model Basics. I'm Tim Kidwell. Let's talk about modifying models for a second. That can be an intensely fearful thing for modelers, getting up the gumption to change their model in some way, no matter how small. And one of the things that we probably run into early on, the earliest, is we'll get rid of a panel line. As we're filling a gap, we're putting the model together and have to put some putty in or join the model together, and we have to sand, and then that panel line goes away, or a number of panel lines go away. We should not fear filling gaps for the chance that some surface detail might disappear. For instance, you can see here on this Doatine that, this seam right there, it's been sanded, but now these panel lines, they've lost some depth. They aren't as crisp as they once were. So those panel lines are going to have to be reintroduced. Now, in another video, we've talked specifically about how you can go ahead and put panel lines back onto your model should you eliminate them. One of the things that we sci-fi modelers can enjoy is that, well, there's not necessarily the historically accurate version of that model or the actual ship or vehicle or what you may have out there. For instance, one of our Gundam authors, Nico Serratos, she recommends for those seams that are difficult to hide, without maybe running plastic over the top of them, to go ahead and use it as a guide to introduce your own panel lines. She also thinks that going over existing panel lines, especially soft ones, is a good idea, just so that you can deepen them, and so when you're introducing pin washes and weathering, that the wash flows into those panel lines a lot easier and a lot better. So, what would you use to accomplish those goals? First off is just the simple triangular or square needle file. Now, for instance, on this upper arm from an RE Destroyed Tomahawk from the Macross series, you can see that there is this seam that runs right down the center of that arm, and that's going to be pretty easy to eliminate with just sanding, going through the different grits and eliminating that seam. However, there are these little grooves down in here that you're not going to be able to get in there with a sanding pad. That's where something like this, triangular or a square needle file, that's going to allow you to get right down in there, and you're going to be able to eliminate that seam and then reestablish the crispness of those grooves once you're all said and done. To the point that after you've been working it for a bit, that under paint, that seam is going to disappear, and those grooves are going to look quite nice. On this portion of a Gundam Kyrios model, you can see at the back side, there's this join, this long join that goes down this part. There's a bit of a sprue gate there, but these are actually two different pieces. You could spend time, eliminating that, which should be done, but then filling that seam and then making sure that it is all, that it disappears. Or, as Nico suggests, what you could do is clean up that blemish there, but then turn this seam into a new panel line that hadn't existed before. It could actually really add some visual interest to the model itself. So you could use, well, I've got a needle scriber right here. You could use a needle scriber along that panel line, dragging that, and deepen it to create that panel line. You could use the backside of a hobby knife blade to do the same, to accomplish the same thing. I would probably instead If I wanted to keep it relatively thin, I would instead turn to a scriber specifically designed for creating panel lines like this one. Or if I wanted to do something a little bit wider, a little bit more substantial, a little bit more dramatic, I could turn to then a micro chisel. And that's going to give a wider groove down that new panel line. For instance, on this cannon that comes from the aforementioned Destroid Tomahawk, you can see that I've got this seam that runs from the back of the gun all the way to the front of it. Now I can sand all this off and I can eliminate that, but then I got looking at it and I was like, well, you know what? This is the perfect opportunity for me to add a little bit of detail there that would otherwise, it would just be smooth and kind of featureless. So that's when I turned to this micro chisel, and then just using that seam as a guide, went, oh, okay, well, I can get this started and then go from there. So you can see that I've created a new panel line where there wasn't one before. I did something similar with the other one over here. It's just a little bit of an added detail, a slight modification to the model, nothing too drastic. And here's the thing, is that the more you look at your models and you start recognizing that there are these places that maybe you can add some detail, it's like it opens up a whole new world to you. For instance, looking at this head on this Destroid. This kit is probably mid-80s, right? Maybe a little bit earlier than that. But I'm now looking at it and going, well, this detail back here, while you can see it, it's really soft. Well, what can I do there? Can I scribe a panel line or two or three to go ahead and give some extra detail in there that otherwise it wouldn't have? So when you start doing that, you start recognizing that there are these places where you can really kind of take your model up a notch. Is it going to be perfect the first time you do it? No. I mean, if it is, that's great and more power to you, but it does take some practice. And what's really good is to have an assortment of tools at your disposal. Like what we've already mentioned, the files, a hobby knife with a good sturdy blade, a needle scriber, a panel line scriber specifically for panel lines, micro chisels, obviously some sanding sticks. If you're concerned about making sure that your lines are straight, or maybe you want to do some fancy designs, you can get scribing templates online. If you just go, you search for them on Google, you're going to find a ton of them out there on the internet. You can use masking tape, a thick masking tape, to help you get a nice straight line. You could use a straight edge. You could use the edge of a photo etched metal fret. One of the favorite tools around here at the Fine Scale Modeler Workshop is also Dymo tape, which is used for, you know, making those really thick stickers that you could punch letters into. It's nice, it's sturdy, and it can give you something really to push your scriber up against. So these are just some thoughts that I was having about modifications on your model. It's just a small step, but you shouldn't be afraid to rescribe panel lines that you may accidentally eliminate while filling seams. And you can see a video about rescribing panel lines in the link below. But you should also take the opportunity, when presented, to go ahead and maybe make some details. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily work for those historically accurate models, right? Rescribing panel lines, that's one thing. Going ahead and deciding, you know what, this Sherman needs a panel line right down the center of the church. No. I mean, maybe if that's what you're looking to do, who am I to tell you that you're wrong to do it or want to do it? But for the historically accurate, probably not always going to be the choice, but definitely on the sci-fi side of things. Don't hesitate to, you know, just stretch your boundaries a little bit, extend your wings, use these tools that we have at the workbench, and do something different with your model.